Idle pleasures. My generation was the first to grow up bathed in the glow from that flickering window into mediated fantasy called television. Aside from the growing repertory of talk shows and forms of entertainment adapted from earlier radio broadcasts, films became a staple to fill airtime and provided a steady diet of literature from base B-movies up to high art cinema. The imagery that flashed ephemerally by, and for some time only in stark black and white, formed our collective unconscious of archetypes. My favorites, the ones that remained long after the show time was past, were the monster films. In my youth, there was no ability to record these films on video, though I would record the sound on cassettes and can play the movie in my mind when listening later. Nor was there any way to purchase and see a complete film that you might have read about. There were brief Super 8 excerpts if you had the proper projector. You had to wait upon the mercies of the programmers for your local channels, which were few in number. Television reception was obtained through positioning an antenna on the roof. No cable, and at times I had to climb onto the roof to reposition the antenna in hopes of catching a signal from a more remote broadcasting station that might be showing a particularly fascinating film listed in the Essential TV Guide, usually in the early morning hours. That magazine was our missile, and I'd get a copy every week and circle the entries of the new and old favorite creature features listed therein. Of course, the best monster films populated the Late Show, beginning at 11:30 p.m. or the Late Late Show, past the witching hour of midnight at about 1 a.m. As a youth, I would at times need to sneak out of my bedroom in the middle of the night and plant myself in front of that TV set, volume on low, to catch the broadcast of some forbidden work of horror. It was a truly magical experience, and the heights of anticipation whetted my excitement, so that often films that weren't particularly outstanding, like The Mermaids of Tiburon or The Screaming Skull, might have just a scene or two which made the vigil worthwhile. So many monster movies were celebrated in Forrest J. Ackerman's magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland, that it became the sacred scriptures for aficionados of the macabre. When the clock struck the proper hour, I was thrilled to see the wonders that had previously only been blurry but infinitely suggestive stills from FM's pages. At times, even with antenna adjustment, I often only got a snowy image, but I'd watch anyway, just to have some knowledge of the film. Since school was mandatory, I'd often go to sleep and set the alarm so that I could rise like my cherished vampires to view that late show. The creatures in these films were my kin. I readily identified with the mad scientist who sought forbidden knowledge, which, in a sense, I was doing just by being up at these truly ungodly hours to watch the films. I knew that if I had half the chance in the same situation, I wouldn't come to the bad end as did the tragic failures depicted, but would actually break through to really new understanding of the secrets of the universe. I identified particularly with the monsters, with the Lovecraftian creature from the Black Lagoon, who swam so gracefully beneath Julie Adams' sexy scientist and reached out with lust and curiosity towards her lithe body. And I felt frustrated along with him when he was put in captivity in the second film, and even worse in the third, when he was horribly burned and lost his ability to remain in his natural environment, only to finally drown as he sought his home. I identified with the various vampires, the Draculas portrayed by Lugosi, Nader, and Lee, and began to lust after those full-figured beauties which Hammer trademarked. The black and white Mexican vampires who moved through fog-shrouded vistas into ornate mansions that were often constructed of adobe, Even the cowboy vampire who at his undead birth resembled Zorro, only to become an invulnerable gunslinger, until felled by a fragment of the true cross fired as a bullet by a preacher. I also identified with the giant monsters, loosed by man's tampering with forces beyond his comprehension, bringing nature's justice home to roost. The beast from 20,000 fathoms, Gorgo, the giant behemoth, black scorpion, and most powerful of all, Godzilla. These hulking gargantuas embodied an immemorial potency that shattered the plans of the parvenu masters of the globe. These films provided archetypal imagery that surged through the imaginations of all we young fans. And since we couldn't see these films again unless we were lucky, we sought out toys that were made as remembrances of the film. There weren't many of these, and they could be crudely rendered. The well-crafted universal monster models put out by Aurora were major icons, lovingly built with airplane glue and carefully painted to be as evocative as possible. Other toys were manufactured for television series, and if there weren't toys, I'd draw images of my favorite icons, working to perfect them, and I would also script further adventures. These toys served as idols of our archetypal divinities. They were power sources for conjuring, sigils that caused atavistic surges of our emotional responses to the movies. We revered them with the same fervor that people in past cultures used for the fetishes and statuary of tutelary divinities that populated home shrines. The models in particular made a prominent impact on my internal psychological landscape, since they had to be constructed, with parts sanded to remove imperfections. Then I used Testor's paints, as aromatic as any sacred incense, to paint the unicolored styrene and thus bring the monsters to vivid life. Painting Frankenstein's monster and working multiple layers to texture the green skin brought on the same ecstasy, I suppose, was experienced by that brilliant scientist when he harnessed the lightning to resurrect the dead tissues of his creation. These avatars of the outre were our ensigns of our outsider status. By embracing these monsters, seeing them as parts of ourselves, they provided a bulwark against the staid, dull normacy of so many of the other kids around us who had more mundane interests. And our passionate devotion to our dark heroes was not a passing phase, but became a creed that provided a perspective used in dealing with the world around us. We were never apostates to our night brethren. If you enter my lair, you'll note the many figures of my patron divinity, the giant radioactive reptile who has always been closest to my heart. Here the king of the monsters remains supreme. And now, through the techno-wizardry of audio chips, many of my totems even give voice to a throaty screonk. Hail Gojira! Today my generation is creating the movies, making certain that toys are issued for all major efforts. This is why there are so many remakes. We look back and some feel that the magic is somewhat diminished. Oh, they of little imagination. So they remake films with contemporary technological wizardry in an attempt to recreate the wonder felt as a child, now that the standards for illusions are much higher and belief in the magic is less powerful. And the toys, the fabulous toys, these are now wrought with an exquisiteness only dreamed about by us as children. We now can go to Toys R Us and buy, often for small amounts of money, intricate and imaginative demonic creations that would do Bosch proud if they appeared in one of his hell scenes. So we now have a ready-made pantheon of dark deities and grotesque demons that we can use to conjure forth the deep feelings that for many have lain dormant since their youth. These are potent talismans, real idols that can evoke dark and shuddersome responses. They are indeed daemons, and these figures made of plastic inspire us. They are reservoirs of power that many of my generation seek, even if they do not understand why they are compelled to do so. But we Satanic magicians, we do understand, and haunt the aisles of regular toy shops as well as those exotic stores that carry Japanese imports, an experience like visiting the temples of another religion. Many have become ecstatic converts. So seek out those gnarled beasties that take you back in time to the ECI of your emergence from innocence to understanding. They are deeply magical tools that can be used to create rituals of astonishing potency.